Hello and welcome to this session of the Cultural Pluralism and Right of Minorities workshop of the Carlos III University of Madrid in Spain. Today we have a special session with Monique Falcao from Ursula University from Brazil. The topic today will be the animal rights in Brazil. I would like to make a brief presentation of Monique Falcao. Well, first a personal presentation and then an official presentation. The personal presentation is that Monique Falcao is known in Carlos III University because he was in the Human Rights Symposium in 2019. He was also participating in the Cultural Pluralism workshop in a session in person in Carlos in 2019 in Carlos III University. And it was very interesting. And he is member of IPSA-RC 26 on human rights. That it's an organization that I belong, and he is one of their active members, and he's always a very optimistic person, and he always put a lot of emotion on everything that she does. And today he's going to talk about animal rights, and is one of his interesting topics that she develops, and she cares about. And for instance, well, I shared the Facebook with her, and I know that more of the updates in Facebook of Monique Falcao are from animal photos or animal topics, and well, it's something that is quite curious. Okay, this is the personal presentation. The official presentation is that he has a PhD theory and philosophy of laws of the University of the State of Rio de Janeiro, professor and researcher of University of Santa Ursula, Rio de Janeiro, and visiting scholar of Max Planck Institute for Legal Philosophy in Frankfurt. And about the topic is a topic of great sensitivity nowadays, also in Spain and in Latin America. It's increasingly the sensitivity for these questions of animal rights. And well, I would like to thank that today he gave this speech in the Cultural Pluralism and Right of Minorities workshop. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Oscar, very much for the presentation. Yes, this is a very important topic, and I mean, polemic, and I would say is still underestimated, I would say, because I guess that's as like all the human rights we would have usually for the human rights to fight and to reach a good level of protection of human rights historically, we always had to fight a lot. Yes, so usually there are three levels, yeah, of to make a proper human right to be properly recognized and enforced by law and by society. First, there's the denial of the request. We can think about women rights, rights for Black people in America, for instance, after slavery, and also gender rights. So first there's the denial, later there's a kind of ridicularization, yes, and then only finally there's a discussion, and then lately acceptance. So historically, since ever, I would say, and mainly since the French Revolution and Illuminism and all those historical marks that we know for the development of human rights. We know that all of them has been conquered after a lot of fights and blood. So this, I would say, is a kind of also of, I would say, not human rights in the strict sense, but somehow is rights of some minorities that need also to be recognized somehow. Because in the end of the day, when we talk about human rights enforcement, we are talking about fight for peace. It's a contradiction, but that's the point. We fight against violence in all those forms. We fight for peace, for a more, I would say, peaceful and loveful world, I would say. So in the end of the day, we want to reduce violence. And that's why, I guess, I would say that's a very important thing that we should go on, we should carry. So I'd like to share my screen quickly. I guess I can, 1 minute. Hopefully you can see. Yes. So I will try to make here slides presentation. Okay. So okay. So that's it. Oh, no, not slides. Okay, just let me come back to my previous one because it's easier for me if you don't mind. This one and this one I can bring here, and then now I can follow you properly here. So the objective of my speech today is actually to present some contributions of civil society to effectiveness of animals' rights in Brazil. I will talk about Brazil because it's a very specific legal environment, I would say. We officially have civil law system, but for minorities' rights enforcement, we usually apply some aspects of common law. So we have several instruments, legal instruments for civil procedure, specific actions, injunctions that allows some organizations of the civil society to request specific rights that are not yet fully recognized by law. We have this in all different kind of minorities, gender, race, disabled people, and a lot of other examples I could give. The civil society organizes itself in some groups that are legally recognized, like civil associations and other civil forms, and they have process legitimation to go to the court justice and require something that's not written in the law. And judiciary, the court justice, the judiciary, is very good and very well reactive in, I would say, sometimes innovating, sometimes creating some rights that is not yet in the law, in the written law. So this is a quite interesting specificity existing in Brazil that it can be shared with other countries, maybe mainly here in Europe, because in Europe we can see that usually the way to have new rights usually is by the legal procedure in the parliament. The judiciary, I would say, is not so creative as in Brazil. So that's why I would focus on the mechanisms existing in Brazil, not the mechanisms, but I will give an overview of the mechanism that we have for a proper effectiveness of animal rights, and of course, some problems that we have with this. Yes, because of course, it brings some issues. So as a roadmap, I would start with explaining a little the problem itself that we have, and then later I would like to discuss with you the solutions. I will try to be, I would say, brief. I will try to not be long with the explanations in order to allow us to discuss a little more if you are interested in. Okay? So, moving forward, all of you know that exists declarations of human rights, international treaties for human rights, international agreements for human rights, requiring the countries to enforce law and policies for humans, but not for animals. So just as curiosity, I bring here a universal declaration of animal rights that is largely defended and spread by the animals' rights militants, and also for the governments of all countries. Of course, that this declaration is considered as soft law. Unfortunately, it does not have enforcement, legal enforcement as law itself, as we all know that the declarations, they have legal nature of soft law. They are recommendations, yeah. They are like a letter of intentions to be followed by the countries that sign the declaration. So here we have some articles. We have many more articles than these. Actually, the original one has around 50. In which the main kinds of usage of animals are described as cruelty. So animal for production of meat and milk, for instance, animals use it for extracting their skin for clothes and all the other kind of usage of animals, I would say. They are considered somehow a kind of a cruelty. So if we would need to follow all the articles of this declaration, I'm afraid we would no longer know the world as we have. For sure, I guess everyone would need to become a vegan somehow. And of course, this is not possible in the short or middle term, or not even in the long term. It would be possible for several economic and cultural reasons and whatever. So yes, but it's only for you to know, for you to learn that exists a declaration of animal rights, and it's quite interesting, very good guideline to be used by those that really would like to defend animals' rights somehow. So I would Just for me. I guess I did something wrong. Okay. Just come back. But okay, like this. So, what is the problem actually that we have in Brazil? I would say, considering regarding animals' rights. As everybody can imagine, animals' rights is officially part of environmental rights. So officially, animal rights is a subsection, I would say, a classification, one of the classifications that we have inside right to a healthy environment. And the right to health environment is quite new everywhere. It's quite new. It's a kind of a fundamental right or a kind of a human right, depending on the aspect we are talking about. But it's a kind of a right that exists and it's being improved worldwide since 20 or 30 years. Yeah, or I would say most 50 years. Only after the Second World War and after the Cold War, I would say, the conception of protecting environment in a very strict way, in a very strong way, is being discussed. Before this, other kinds of human rights were being, I would say, were getting attention. Yeah, so if we go back to the history of human rights, first we had the individual rights or civil rights as the first wave, I would say, of human rights to be defended, to be developed, to be defined, and to be implemented. Just after the French Revolution. Later, or because of the bad effects of the Industrial Revolution, we had I would say, discussions and improvement of the social rights. Yeah. And only after the Second World War and the Cold War, we had finally the discussions about seriously implement some fundamental rights that would lead and would need solidarity between civil society and government. If in the first wave of fundamental rights, meaning the civil rights, we had at the time a request of the state to be more absent, I would say, in order to give freedom and liberty for the people to properly have their property, to properly sign and accomplish contracts everywhere. And later, with the social rights after the Industrial Revolution, we had another kind of perspective for the state. The state would need to be more present because the state would need to prepare and to enforce public policies to give to people a good health system, education system, protection for labor, so labor law, social security. We here in the so-called third wave after the Second World War, the Cold War, for the collective rights, we are talking about solidarity, meaning that both civil society and state government, both of them need to work together to keep the environment in a healthy situation, in healthy conditions to assure that the future generations of people could have a proper place to live. So we are talking about preservation of nature in all those forms, including animals. Besides that, in a more philosophical way, after the Second World War and the Cold War, and mostly after the Second World War, I would say, a conception of peace and a conception of reduction of violence was getting more and more attention. It is a good consequence about how the human being started to be seen after the Second World War. The human being started to be seen, recognized as an individual with how can I say, being an individual that would not depend and would not need to be an instrument to the state or to the collective or to the society. The human being as a self, as a finality in itself, having its own aims, objectives, and finalities for himself, this would need to be enough to recognize him as an individual which existence should not depend on the validation, I would say, of state, of other societies. The human being would not be an instrument anymore that could be used by the state or by the government or by the civil society for the good collective interests. I mean, of course, we can discuss a lot exactly what it means or it does not mean. This is a philosophical discussion, which is quite interesting. But the important is to recognize that some aspects of Immanuel Kant's description of the human being, they need to be seen as integrity. This would lead to several deep protections of the self, of the human being as individual, of the self. And those conceptions started to be also applied to the nature and to animals on the following decades. In Latin America, the countries in Latin America, several countries like Colombia, Ecuador, have very, very advanced legal statements protecting the nature, including nature as subject of rights, including nature as an entity, a legal entity that can claim rights, I would say, in its name, in the court justice, and with very specific rights in the constitution of those countries, for instance. So we have a lot to learn with South America, Latin America countries concerning the development and the improvement of the rights of the nature itself, the nature as an individual, I would say, or with integrity. So what we have in Brazilian constitution is how the problem is the difference that we have between the legal wording, the wording of the constitution, and what is requested by civil society. In Brazil, if we if we can read here the article of the Constitution, we have a clear duty of government and community to preserve nature. And if we realize here this specific line, there's a specific request, I would say, that the government is responsible for to, in accordance with law, to prohibit some practice that can put the ecological function at risk, meaning that can cause extinction or submit animals to cruelty. So this is what is written. If we would follow strictly what is written, the civil society would not have voice enough and strength enough to change some legal regulations that existed about the animals. So in Brazil, officially, I would say, the legal framework is formally anthropocentric and positivist, meaning that the interests of the human being is in the center of all the public policies, and positivist meaning that once we officially have a civil law system, every kind of public policy should first be based on a previous legal statement, meaning the public policies should be founded based on Parliament's legal statements arising from Parliament, arising from legal procedures for building law, written law. Animals are formally defined as objects of law in the civil code. It means that they should be used as human rights, as the citizens and the humans have interest specific. The Parliament is quite conservative, and here we could discuss about the political parties that we have there. But I will not start this discussion here now. But anyway, the Parliament is quite conservative. It's mostly built by agricultural and how do we say, agricultural and farmers representatives. Yeah, so it means that for instance, the farmers and the agricultural representatives, they defend that the animals should continue as object of law, and the animals should be managed in an economical way, not related to wellness, but related to the most effective economic way to raise cows and all porks and chickens and whatever, in order to give more profits to the business. Okay. Okay, and we have a civil law tradition, and we have an expectation of following legal process, legislative processes to have the law. In a different way, I would say that the most part of the civil society in Brazil is nowadays becoming highly biocentric and neo-positivist oriented. Nowadays in Brazil, because of the highly diverse that we have, as you know, it's expected from all the several different groups of minorities existing there, that they try to make their rights enforced via court justice. So the civil society, the most part of it, accepts animals, I would say, as subject of rights. Not only pets like dogs, cats, but also recognizing other animals also as a subject of rights. And in sociology, we work a lot with the conception of new social movements. New social movements are, I would say, the newest category of social movements that we could, I mean, of course, we're talking about a part of it, but it's a good classification, I would say, to define the groups organized in the society aiming for a change in the culture or aiming for be included in the culture, to be included socially and culturally speaking, and expecting a change of cultural behavior to in order to have their specificities respected. So this is a quite different approach of the classical social movements. The classical social movements that in the past gave origin to social rights, for instance, the old classical social movements, they were more interested in changing the social and political structure in order to have more access to economic resources. Of course, that this is still important nowadays, but what we can see as a big force that is rising really strong in Brazil are what we call the new social movements. So those groups, they require and implements new public policies for animal rights. Brazil has also a very interesting characteristic, which is the civil society, the groups, the communities, to be more precise, the communities, local communities in Brazil, they work a lot to try to build access to some social rights and economic rights that the government cannot afford. So it's a like of a self-made group to have to assure that they would have some quality of life. So it's a little different from what usually we can see in Europe, because in Europe usually we see that the government is requested to provide social rights, and the government is present. There's a highly big dialogue between society and government, and so most part of the social rights are via government. But in Brazil, the civil society, the communities, they have to organize themselves and to find themselves a way to assure to themselves that they would have somehow good health and, I would say, some kind of education and whatever. So sometimes when the government is absent, unfortunately, the communities need to work by their own. And in this context, animals' rights becomes a little more strong, because there are, for instance, several small groups of people defending animal rights by their hands, fighting against big companies, big fabrics, and also on daily basis, for instance, for dogs, cats, and Sylvester wild animals and all these things. So I would say that these aspects are being recognized in Brazil as some aspects of common law, because those groups, they reach out the judiciary to find some legitimation and to find some protection for animal rights. And some examples that we can see, I would give some examples here, are, for instance, the prohibition of the cockfighting and dog fighting, for instance. So in 2007, the Court Justice, the Supreme Court Justice in Brazil, the Supreme Court Justice, the Constitutional Court, I would say, something equivalent to it, declared unconstitutional this practice. And it was very interesting because there were already several small injunctions and decisions by several different local courts in the cities in Brazil. And so like one small group of animal defenders saw that would exist a dog fighting or cockfighting, and then decided to call the police and decided to go to the small court justice in the city to reach out that there was a cruelty, and then the policy would go there with a judicial decision to stop it, for instance. So after a lot of small events like this, in 2007, the Constitutional Court Justice decided to declare definitely unconstitutional and become this activity declared this as a crime. And so also now it's completely forbidden. Now it's much more easy to ask a police if some of these activities happen. What is interesting here is that this injunction, this action, I would say, that was proposed in the Supreme Court was based on local legal statement of a city in Rio de Janeiro that decided to make a regulation, make a regulation of how this sport should be practiced by the people that were interested in, yeah. And that was, I would say, so it was a legal statement from the local parliament, and this has been taken into the Constitutional Court Justice to be declared as unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court went beyond. So the Supreme Court did not only declare this local statement as unconstitutional, but also declared that the activity itself was unconstitutional and should be prohibited in the whole country. I mean, legally speaking, from the procedure law, I would say, point of view, this is very interesting, and this reveals a true activism of the judiciary. Okay. So the other example is what we called Farra do Boi, bull party, I would say. Again, it was exactly the same thing, but this kind of activity is an activity specific of south of Brazil. Is like one or two cities that have this as a tradition. And so it was interesting because during this discussion in the Court Justice, there was a lot of anthropologists and historians that was defending that the cultural rights should be above, should prevail over the animals' rights. So we had the discussions about cultural rights, traditional rights versus animals' rights. But the Court Justice, again, after several other local decisions of the local judiciary courts, after all of this, the Supreme Constitutional Court decided to turn this to say that even if it's considered traditional, the cruelty here could not be accepted in name of the culture. And so the animal rights prevail on top of the cultural rights. Similar to this, in Brazil, there was another interesting discussion about the usage of rites for religious rituals. It was a very interesting thing because in this case, the Supreme Court decided completely the opposite. Specifically for the African religion in Brazil, it has been authorized to do animals sacrifices for those religious rituals. The argument was that after the ritual, the animal would be eaten, and the animal would be somehow, all the parts of the animal would be used for the religion, and of course to avoid prejudice against the African religions. This is a very sensitive topic in Brazil because, as you know, the African religions, they are a heritage from the slaves. And so we have still nowadays, big discussions about inclusion of the Black people, inclusion of the descendants of the ex-slaves, and we have, how to include them economically, legitimately, by recognition and everything. So it's a very sensitive discussion and would be interesting later to make a debate about it. So for this second case about the ritual, the religion's ritual, the Supreme Court decided that the religion right would prevail, would be on top of the animals' rights. But the STF does not think like this for all kinds of religions' rights. So it's quite interesting because the definition of cultural rights, the definition of religious rights can change considering the context. And this is one of the critics that this approach of judicial activism, this is a very big and strong critique that we have against this model. Yeah, this model of judicial activism. Okay, and the last topic, the last case I'd like to show you is a case. This was another. We went to the last one. This is a very good example that we also had in Brazil. It started also with local actions in several different countries, in several different states and cities in Brazil. Just for your information, Brazil has 26 states or 26 federal countries, I would say, something like that, and 5,000 municipalities. 5,500 municipalities, to be more exact. So you can imagine how many local injunctions between these 5,500 municipalities can exist, okay? And this was also one very interesting one, which is that in which the Supreme Court finally prohibited the local executive powers to kill the animals that were rescued for several different reasons. Okay, so rescued from mistreatment, rescued from traffic of animals, rescued from whatever. So it means that no animal can be killed because of under any reason, except of course if the animal has a very contagious disease, or if the animal needs to be euthanized because it's too ill and cannot be recovered anymore. I mean, the only reasons why an animal can be killed, I would say, is because someone is killing it to eat by hungry, because it's hungry, okay? Or, of course, in the industry of meat and all these things, for research, but we are also reducing more and more the usage of animals in research, in scientific research. And animals can be killed because if they have some contagious, for public health, I would say, considering if they have some contagious disease or something like that. Besides that, it's not allowed in Brazil anymore to kill animals, for instance, as a prevention for overpopulation. So killing animals as a control of population is not allowed anymore in Brazil. It's a crime. And so it's also very interesting because there was a lot of critics on that, because Brazil really have a really high problem of dog streets and all these things. But in the end of the day, the important is that with this prohibition, now the local governments are forced to have budget for public policies for animals in the streets and rescued animals. So nowadays in Brazil, there are really a lot of public veterinary hospitals, public ones like Public Health for People, public veterinary hospitals, a lot of sanctuaries, bioparks, refugees, and many of them are just like multiplying yearly in Brazil. So now it's with a lot of also new, for instance, courses for medicine, veterinary, and all like nursery, veterinary. So this is a field that is really increasing a lot of really increasing in Brazil, which is quite nice. So that's so. And the last one, that's the one I'd like to present here with the problems that we actually see. Vaquejada is a kind of a practice in which the men, the guys, they need to take the tail of the cow and make like this. So the cow needs to fall on the floor with the 4 legs on top. And so this is, for instance, one of the things that can happen. Let's see if you can see here. The tail has been, for instance, the skin of the tail here has been completely removed in one of the spots, I would say. Okay, besides that, of course, many cows get completely broken, the back, and after this need to be sacrificed, need to be killed anyway, because these cows cannot be recovered anymore. Okay, and you can see the cruelty here is completely, is just for fun. But this was activity highly appreciated by the farmers, the big farmers in Brazil, because with this activity was also a stage for politicians. So usually these events, they were usually followed by politicians discussing to ask for votes in the elections and for political marketing, okay? Usually for the right wing. And so in 2016, the Supreme Court decided to turn this activity completely unconstitutional and prohibited following the same example of Farra do Boi and the same example of cockfighting and dogfighting. But now, in the next year, we were in the government of Bolsonaro at that time. So in the next year, the parliament, the federal parliament, edited a law recognizing this vaquejada as a cultural manifestation and excluding the cruelty. So it was interesting because they did a kind of amendment in the federal constitution saying that the cultural manifestations don't have cruelty, automatically don't have cruelty. And so now the question is, how can law define cruelty if this concept is outside legal stuff? And so nowadays, the discussion is still ongoing back in the judiciary, because the judiciary is still discussing new injunctions, new actions proposed by civil society in order to declare again this activity unconstitutional. So my question here is, the objective was to explain, to show, or to ask you if we have really a solution or not. Because what we call constitutional mutation, which is this way to change the meaning of the constitutional wording, you know, instead of changing the wording, we change the meaning. Yeah, and the judiciary is very active to this. So I just brought here quickly some theoretical, I would say, explanations, but we can later go forward. I guess I already talked really too much, maybe 1 hour almost. So I give the floor back to you in order for us maybe continue discussing as you wish. Thank you, Oscar. And sorry for the late. I guess I was too long.
No, it's okay. It's okay. If you would like to make the conclusion with this as you prefer.
No, it's okay. It's just because the main explanations that we have, it's only to give an overview of the theoretical arguments usage. Only this.
Okay.
Is that in the civil society, we usually legitimate the civil society because we accept them as a legal constitution interpreter. So there are several legal figures, legal tools, I would say, allowing the civil society to reach out the court directly without passing by parliament, asking for new rights, for instance. We have the executive power that is actually implementing public policies for animals' well-being based on civil society requests. And we have the judiciary power, as I've been saying here since 1 hour. We work a lot with, for instance, Robert Alexi and Ronald Dworkin. They are our two main theoretical approach to recognize the judiciary power enforcement, you know, to create new rights, I would say. So and then we come with a lot of theoretical things around. I will not discuss this here now. I mean, it will be too theoretical. And we have the contra-majority activism in the judiciary. That's for sure. But of course, the legislative can react in two different positions, in two different directions. Either the legislative legalize this new approach, and in animal rights, in minority rights, that's what is being happening at most, I would say. But we also have a very high resistance from the most conservative groups in the executive power, mostly because they are right-wing, representing the big farmers in Brazil for meat production, milk production, soya production, and all these things. And we have the so-called effect backlash, which is the legislative majority interests. They keep on defending their interests, fighting against the judiciary in order to annulate the judiciary decisions. So we have this force and back game, you know, going on institutionally. So thank you very much, Oscar. And yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Very interesting, very interesting. I have a lot of questions, but the custom in the workshop, in this workshop, is now there is an open turn of questions. Everyone who is interested to talk can have now the time to talk, to ask questions. Please, is your turn. Who is interested to ask something? Maybe you need to switch off the screen.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Like this?
Okay. My first question could be about this last idea. If I have understood. Okay, Juan Pablo. Switch on your micro and or your camera and go on.
Okay. Hello again, Monique. And thank you so much for sharing with us your paper, first, and second, for your time in this moment. I don't know what time is in Brazil, but I imagine that is early. So I have some doubts, in a particular part of your paper where you explain some critiques to anthropocentrism from historically view in the Western thought. First, because Copernicus destroyed or dethroned the belief that humans are the center of the universe. This is a shift from geocentric to heliocentric. And I think that is strictly speaking about the geocentrism, not the anthropocentrism, not about a relationship from humans to another kinds of life, right? On the other hand, Marx focuses, I think, on internal issues related to human conditions, not hierarchy in the nature. For example, the Marxist materialism was concerned was concerned in explaining how production relations and material condition influence and shape the development of the society, not exactly about the relationship between human and other, or from human with another kind of life. So could you develop more this interesting idea? Because I don't know if I am wrong.
No.
And another topic, another issue, not issue. Another topic is more a question than a commentary. It's about the vaquejadas. I don't know. I want to know if this tradition or sport, I don't know what is exactly, this cultural practice is still popular in Brazil, because I think that is similar to bullfighting in Mexico and Spain, that in the long term, these kind of activities will disappear. I'm 100% that in Mexico the bullfighting will disappear in the following years. But I don't know if these activity are still popular and is necessary to fight in constitutional terms. So thank you so much, Monique, again, and nothing.
Yeah, thank you, Juan. Thank you very much for your questions. So first, yes, about Copernicus, Marx, and all those other, I would say, thinkers, I would say, the contribution was actually, it was more in an epistemological level, I would say. It was more to criticize that the human ideas of each time of them, of course, was not so central. I mean, because, for instance, Copernicus brought the idea that the sun is the center, not the earth. The idea that the earth was the center was built in order to have a god. It was built by the Catholic Church and all these things. And so in more in an anthropological way, I would say, because it was thinking for in the human interest, I would say. When Copernicus bring the sun is the nature. I mean, the sun is the nature. The sun is not only the planet Earth, is not the Catholic Church. So it's this kind of another perspective that contributed actually to not to say that the animals should be considered, but to say that the main statements that were at that time being recognized as a true, they should be questioned. So it was in this way, because when we talk about anthropocentrism, it's not only the interests of the human, but all the ideas that has been built to keep the status quo of the human being on the top of the chain. You see? And Marx also brings this different kind of perception in epistemology, because Marx brings actually the one that were marginalized into the discussion. Because I guess that Marx has a very important contribution. It was not even in the economics. It was much more to question it, for instance, the idealism that was existing at the time, which was a kind of building an idea so abstract, I would say, completely apart of the social reality. So Marx and the other Marx, Weber, and Durkheim, they brought into discussion the social reality that was completely, I would say, hidden or not seen by the bourgeois or by the main status quo that was existing. That was the main contribution, you know, to give visibility to the marginalized ones. And with this new kind of thinking, then we could also later make this in other different levels of society, I would say. For instance, that's why nowadays, for instance, all these discussions of minorities, which is how the wing right see the left right. You know, the discussions of gender, of all these minorities, all these marginalized, they put all of them put in the box left wing, and in a pejorative way, which is worst, you know. But Marx at the time was not worried about those kinds of minorities that nowadays we recognize. At that time, he was thinking about other questions. But this kind of epistemological view, because we are talking about superstructure and infrastructure, this dialogue that he was seeing at that time for the materialism, that is a kind of a theoretical think of way, epistemology, that we can apply to think about several kind of different minorities that we have that are invisible, they are marginalized. And we will discover many more. Yeah. For the vaquejada, you are right. This is an interesting thing. I don't want to make bad. I don't want to be the one saying bad things about politics here. But the point is that the vaquejada is still popular in a very specific place of Brazil, the northeast and part of the center east of Brazil. I mean, the northeast, there are some cities there that deals with vaquejada, and the center east deals with rodeio, which is quite similar. The rodeio, the one that we have to take the like this, or the guy on the car on the bull with one hand up, and like the United States. So, and but both of them are highly used as entertainment for political campaigns. Usually the event is to have some guy singing, sertanejo style usually, and then these kind of events with these animals, and then the politician comes to make marketing of this party, the political party. You see? So there are several studies showing this already, and it is interesting because only when the vaquejada has been prohibited, and the next step would be to prohibit completely the rodeios in the center east, only when these start to happen concretely, then the conservative wing of the parliament decided to, in a time record of 4-6 months, they decided to edit the law and amend to the constitution. I mean, usually to amend the constitution in Brazil can take 1 year. And it's a very difficult process because it has a high quorum it needs a really high quantity of votes to change the wording of the constitution. It's a very hard process, legislative. And they did this in a time record of 4-6 months. And if you see the records of the votes, the majority, 95% was from the right wing in the time frame of Bolsonaro government. I don't want to be the one being speeches here, left or right wing, but there are a lot of coincidences because this movement of this backlash, this contra-activism movement from the legislature did not occur in no other prohibition for other traditional activities in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
Did not
Actually, Monique, I think that is important, this political vision, because for me, when I was reading your paper, it was quite interesting, and I tried to find some videos about the vaquejada. So the first thing that appeared in Google was something like women powerful, the women that are practicing the vaquejada. So, and it was some notice created by political parties. Mm-hmm. So it was quite interesting for me, this specific topic, because I think that nowadays some political parties are taking this kind of practice like a flag for their movements.
Exactly. And it's like it's interesting because they complain a lot about the other minority fights, mainly for women, for instance, as you know, all the declarations that Bolsonaro gave about women and all these things. He's very sexist in this level, but they use the discourse of a woman being promoted, and recognized specifically for that kind of aim. And they also use this for the other, they defend inclusion in the economy, that this brings a lot of, It assures a lot of employees, you know, it makes the economy run. It's very important economic thing. But in the end of the day, you know, I mean, this was the activity that was being protected by them, but all the other traditional and cultural activities are not. So we see that there's it's not for the cultural itself, you know, but yeah. Thank you very much, Juan.
Thank you so much.
Okay, well, any other questions? More questions for the... Well, my first question is from James Anaya. One idea of James Anaya, who is an expert on indigenous rights, indigenous people. He's an international professor. And once I translated one of his articles, and the thesis of these articles was that the indigenous people were achieving more goals if they are litigating in a specific more than with great speeches, with great ideals, with great appealing to history, appealing to sovereignty. But if they appeal to specific rights and if they go to the courts, I think something similar you said about animal rights, that if they appeal to specific rights and they go to the courts, they need to achieve more goals. More or less this?
Yes. Yes, that's exactly the idea. Actually, the minorities in Brazil, they have much better their rights assured, secured by the court justice than by the parliament. That's I can bring several examples of, mainly if you see the rights of homosexuals, Oscar, all of them are assured by the court justice. Until nowadays, there's no civil law saying that they can marry, saying that they can adopt children, saying that they can have heritage from each other, or no. All of the rights has been assured by the Supreme Court's law, including the crime of homophobia has been a creation from the court justice. I mean, and from criminal law point of view, this is scary. You have a judiciary creating a type of crime, creating a penal type. This is scary, you know, because this should be really done by the parliament. But the parliament is so absent, is so omissive, that who needs to do this is the court justice. The problem is we need to have a court justice with judges that are aligned with the people, and usually they are not elected by people. They are selected by a public concurso público, a public procedure of choosing, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, well, this is very interesting. This is a hot topic now in Spain. The judges have different press in different countries, and there is a great discussion about the election of the body who governs the judges and who elect the body who chooses the members of the body who elect the judges, the parliament or the judges themselves. This is a great topic. And what is the role of the judges? We have discussed in the classes and in this workshop also with Juan Pablo the last constitutional reform in Mexico. You know that the judges are elected, all the judges are elected. This is a huge topic, and it's interesting. It's interesting that in Colombia and in Brazil, the judges are proclive to minority rights. This is something good, no? I think. Okay, my second question is, it's my fault, no? But I don't have a clear idea. If you said that in the Brazilian constitution, the animal, okay, I have read that it's a duty of the institutions to protect the animals, to protect the flora and the fauna. But is declared a right of the animals, or it's a duty, but it's not the same in legal terms?
Agreed. No, actually both. Actually, it's a duty because in the constitution, it's written duty. Yes, the constitutional says everyone has the right to an ecological balanced environment, common good for the people and essential to healthy quality of life. And the government and the community have the duty to defend and preserve it for present and future generations. But it's a duty, and in Brazil there are several legal statements, legal documents with regulations and describing several different kinds of crimes and what can be cruelty here and there for wildlife, for animals of production, for domestic. I mean, there are several. Many. I mean, 90% of them has been created in the last 10 years, to be very honest. Okay, in the last 10, 15 years, we had a kind of a boom of legal regulations for animals' rights in general. But yes, it's a duty. It's not a declaration. But how this duty should be done and the measures for this, it's being built by civil society and government, I would say.
And now, two questions. I have three more questions. Two questions nice. from Kimlicka and Zoopolis. You know this work of Kimlicka with his wife Donaldson. That in Zoopolis you mentioned Kant, and it's interesting Kant. But in Zoopolis, Kimlicka says that what happens if we apply the categorical imperative to animals? This means if we said you should treat the others as an end in itself, not as a mean. And if we apply this to animals, are you favorable to apply this to animals? Are you aware of all the consequences to apply this to animals? This means you cannot eat animals if you cannot use animals for instrumentally.
That's the point. But that's the point. This is I would say it's a construction that will take long time. But it's important to have this idea in mind, because even if I mean, it will be quite impossible to apply this 100% as we apply for humans, that's for sure. But if we have this idea as a common sense, the violence will reduce a lot. That's the point. I mean, sometimes it's not to implement this concretely, because this would be completely impossible. I mean, the vegan people is really like, they're very brave to be vegan, because they live in a world that this is quite impossible to be. And it will be quite impossible to have a completely full society in the next 100, 200 years, I mean. But the idea of seeing them as individuals, I guess it will reduce the exploration, and it will reduce the violence against them. Because sometimes it's not to make this completely 100% vegan, but if people start to see them with a little more empathy or respect them as individuals, you know, for sure that the daily life and the way that people deal with the animals around will change from time to time. Not with only the pets, but also with insects and with the other animals that exist. People can slowly start to replace, for instance, clothes made of animals by clothes made of other things, and like this, the life will get in some balance. In the end of the day, it's about having a little more, I would say, empathy, you know, and respect the individuals in general. Because if you have a look during the slavery time, it would be completely impossible to think that the slave should have his body preserved, for instance, without receiving the massive, how do we say, castigos, that the violence that they would receive, you know. Of course, we are talking about different scales, but the main idea, the epistemological thinking, should be the same. That's it.
Another idea of Kimblicka in his book is well, later we will read what Juan Jose, the idea of citizenship to animals. And he says something quite interesting. Well, I don't agree, but he is quite interesting. He says that we need to uncouple citizenship from an active perspective, and we need to consider that animals could be suitable to have citizenship. And is his idea. I would like to read, Juan Jose has gone. I would like to read his message. Thank you very much, Monique. Your presentation and perspective look forward very interesting. Without a doubt, this is a topic that fosters deep reflection and opposing viewpoints with legal theory. I have to leave now. Once again, I'm very, very grateful. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, my last point. I was in Lisbon in a World Congress of UBR, well, a World Congress of Philosophy of Law. I was in a workshop, and I was presenting something about reasonable accommodation, and the other communication was about a topic that you mentioned something similar about religious accommodation, but it was very interesting for me because I never realized that there is a contradiction between religious freedom and animal rights. And it's the case of halal food and kosher food. And there is an exception in certain legislations. There is an exception to kill the animals in the halal ritual, in the kosher ritual. Although the animal suffering is greater than in the usual process, in the usual system. Do you have an opinion?
Yes. Yes. Actually, Oscar, this is also a hot topic in Brazil. Because of this judgment, this decision we had for the African religion, now people is debating about the halal and the kosher also. And one of the measures that the animals organization are taking seriously is to forbidden Brazil to export alive cows and alive bulls to be killed in Israel or to be killed in the Arabic countries. This is the hot discussion. So we have already several local decisions forbidding it, prohibiting these big ships to cross the ocean with these animals alive to be killed in the Arabic countries, for instance, and in the Israel countries. But when these decisions arrive to the Supreme Court is still reverting, is still accepting based on economic arguments, economic and also legal arguments, because these animals are for feeding. It's to be eaten. It's not cultural or something. So the discussions are going really further in this field here, because in Brazil it's forbidden to kill animals to eat. I mean, it's not forbidden, but we have humanitarian rules, as you know, as in Europe also have. But in Brazil, it's not forbidden to kill animals in a different way if it's needed to eat for hungry, you know, because if Brazil prohibits completely to kill animals in a different way of the humanitarian, then people, for instance, in Northeast or the indigenous people or the other people will not be allowed to take an animal from the forest, kill it and eat. You see? So these boundaries are being highly discussed here. The arguments that the animal communities, the animal organizations give is the highly suffering conditions that these animals have to suffer during the traject until there, and the impacts on the environment, because you imagine how 100,000 animals in a ship 3 months in the ocean.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, but I fully agree with you, and this is a big discussion here. Yeah.
Well, interesting. There is any more questions? Well, okay, very well. Okay, thank you very much. It has been very interesting.
Thank you, Ashka. It's me who appreciates.
It has been very interesting, and well, it's always good having you in the workshop. I hope it will not be the last time, and will be another time in this workshop. And you are welcome. And okay, well, see you all the people from the workshop next session in 15 days, or with, I think, Renato Sotelo on freedom of speech. And thank you very much to the speaker, Monique Falcao. Thank you very much for all the attendees for being here. And well, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.